We have Ken Dykewald as a keynote speaker. And I have a flyer for him and his new book on the back table as well. So come on by. It's going to be a lot of fun. Another person is Josh Kornbluth, who does a citizen brain monologue. It's wonderful. And I'm not talking directly. I will. The more exciting news is we're working with the Marin County Commission on Aging to provide lectures on computer topics. The mystery of the computer is about to get unwound for our seniors in Marin County. And all of their members and all of our members are invited to lectures about twice a month. We have 2 scheduled for May and 2 scheduled for June. And they're about things like computer security, what is the cloud, all this sort of stuff in a language that we as older adults can understand. So feel free to come on board. And we have 4 lectures planned for now. We're planning others later. So another flyer, a third flyer. I've been busy. Computer with us, people who understand. All right, at this point, I'm going to introduce Dick Park. Now, Dick is the head of the curriculum committee, and he is vital. The committee is vital. Choose the books that we review and the way we review them. Dick, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. Noon to now completing 9 years of the curriculum committee working closely with the library and with Book Passage to bring you interesting authors talking about their book, talking about how they came to write the book, talking about any questions that you will want to ask them when they have concluded the interview. It has been 9 years that we've been doing this with 1 year break, the first year of COVID, that we had to have no program at all. But the second year last year, we did manage to get it onto Zoom. No in person, but we did manage to get it onto Zoom. Strong committee, 9 people who review the possibilities of authors that we think you as members and others, but particularly you as members of the aging population, and that's me, would like to hear. And so thanks to them for all of the work that they've done to be able to present this program today. The program is made presentable as a result of the strong support and our strong work with both the library and with Book Passage, but most importantly, under the auspices of the College of Marin. College of Marin is broken into several kinds of divisions. We are very fortunate to have 1 staff person working with the curriculum committee, and I'm going to ask her to come forward now and tell you why the college is supporting this particular program and what else the continuing education program at the college has to offer to all of you. Valerie Makowitz.
Thank you, Dick, for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone, and welcome once again on a beautiful spring day to a Friday afternoon author series. We are again honored to be here partnering with ESCOM. Gary spoke to you a little bit about that wonderful program that supports over 55 and the younger to engage in events like this, where we all get together, learn something, and get to meet amazing authors and get to gather together. And then also the curriculum committee, which I have had the pleasure of serving with for, I'd say, at least 10 years. We get together and we think, what amazing events can we put together like this? So I'm going to talk to you about community education. If you're a Marin resident, you probably get the schedule in your mailbox 3 times a year. And we offer, I like to say, the fun classes, no homework, no tests. So you just take it for personal enrichment. Who wants to learn how to make mozzarella cheese? Anybody interested? Sounds fun, right? Okay. So other classes that we have are intuitively communicating with animals, how to write your own personal story, how to get published. So just fun classes. And within 2 days, we're going to be having that up on our website. And our brand new website that no longer looks like Windows 95. It looks like 2023, everybody. So please go check it out, okay? We have worked very, very hard on it. So I would love to introduce one of the great partners on this campus in one of our beautiful buildings on this campus, one of the original buildings, Busselman Hall. You will find the College of Marin Library. So I would like to introduce David Patterson and his team of wonderful helpers here.
Valerie, come on up. This is great. Well, it's so nice to see all of you, and thank you for coming out on such a beautiful day to welcome our 2 distinguished authors. We have a whole team, and I'd like to introduce them. Berenice Monroy, who's the heart and soul and administrative assistant of our Umoja learning community. Natalie Fomperosa, student leader and volunteer and Umoja ambassador. Juan Pablo Izquierdo, student leader, IT library student worker, and transfer student transferring in August to San Francisco State with a scholarship. Yay. Malika Smith, Umoja success story, and a student services administrative assistant for College of Marin's activities and advocacy department. And finally, Nikisha Dyer, an avid reader, a great friend of the library, and the very first student in Umoja. And now she's the coordinator of College of Marin's learning communities. Can you welcome them all?
We are lucky to have with us today Anita Gail Jones. Ms. Jones is a visual artist, professional storyteller, and writer. She was born and raised in Albany, Georgia, and lives here in Marin. Her debut novel, The Peach Seed, is available for pre-order from Book Passage. We are lucky to have Kay, bookseller from Book Passage, here today. Can everyone turn around and say hi to Kay?
Hey.
Please see Kay at the back to pre-order your copy. This novel will be published on August 1st in just 3 months, and we can't wait to read it. Ms. Jones maintains a strong connection with the southwest corner of Georgia where she grew up. The region is the setting for The Peach Seed. The Peach Seed was selected as a 2021 finalist in the PEN Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction.
The Peach Seed was acquired by the famous Henry Holt Publishing Company, which has been publishing excellent fiction, poetry, and nonfiction for over 150 years. Can I see a show of hands, please, if anyone here is a fan of Toni Morrison? That's what I thought. Well, guess who originally published Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eyes? Holt. Ms. Jones would say you're off to a strong start.
Novelist A.J. Verdell praises The Peach Seed with these words, and I quote, "You will not want to put this engrossing story down as Anita Gail Jones introduces a whole family of survivors, planted and deeply rooted in Albany, Georgia."
Is a multi-generational novel, an epic debut that explores the origins of a South Georgia's family tradition of giving carved peach seed monkeys to all male descendants. The book traces the struggle of a family's modern-day sons and daughters, the legacies of America's civil rights movement, and the far-reaching impacts of the 1800s slave trade from Senegal to Charleston, South Carolina.
We are also lucky to have with us today Margaret Wilkerson Sexton. Miss Wilkerson Sexton was born and raised in New Orleans. She studied creative writing at Dartmouth University and law at UC Berkeley. Before becoming an author, Miss Wilkerson Sexton was a lawyer.
Excuse me. Her novel, The Revisioners, won or was a finalist of numerous awards, including the 2020 Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize and the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work.
The Revisioners was a national bestseller as well as a New York Times notable book of the year. About the book, Ms. Wilkerson Sexton says, and I quote, "I wanted to show the power that comes through intergenerationally when you're dealing with ancestors who have survived major trauma. Where does all their hope go? Where does all their wisdom go? Where does all that strength go? I believe it resides in the descendants," end quote.
Her debut novel, A Kind of Freedom, was longlisted for the National Book Award and the Northern California Book Award, won the Crook's Corners Book Prize, and was the recipient of the First Novelist Award from the Black Caucus of American Library Association. Her work has been published in ZIHZ-zih-vah, the Paris Review, the Oprah Magazine, the New York Times Book Review, and other publications. She lives in Oakland with her family.
On the Rooftop is a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. Reese Witherspoon has called it an utterly original and brilliant story. Elizabeth Gilbert, beloved author of Eat, Pray, Love, calls On the Rooftop a spectacular novel. She goes on to say it's a luscious, evocative, heartbreaking, joyful story of richful, talented sisters who are on the verge of musical stardom in the 1950s, while their neighborhood in San Francisco is also on the verge of great change. If you haven't read On the Rooftop yet, please do get your hands on a copy and treat yourself to this unforgettable story.
Ms. Wilkerson Sexton, I listened to your first two novels on audiobook on the library's Libby app. Anyone here a fan of Libby? You can listen to books or read books on Libby through the library, and I enjoyed them so much, especially the character of Josephine in The Revisioners, and most especially Josephine's thoughts about miracles. So I thought I'd read this. What's a miracle? Something you can't explain coming to pass. Something that doesn't make sense existing anyway. So much of the day is miraculous. And if you notice one example, you'll get pointed in the direction of another. The insides of them, that buzz, that fire will fill you up inside, and you can put your hand out and touch something commonplace and watch it bloom into something else that it shouldn't be. There's the stuff of miracles swimming all inside you, all around you. I'm enjoying On the Rooftop immensely. I'm about 40 pages into it. I spent too much time on our first two novels, but thanks to your novel, I'll never think of the San Francisco Fillmore District the same way again. Plus, it caused me to want to rewatch the old favorite on Fiddler on the Roof, and which I hadn't watched for decades, and which is central to your book. Friends and lovers, friends and book lovers, please welcome
The interview is please don't start the immediate
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. What a treat. Very special. Thank you. Miss Margaret. After getting to know Miss Vivian and Ruth and Esther and Chloe and the whole crew in the book On the Rooftop, It is such a pleasure to finally meet you
Oh,
today.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. Thank you to everyone at the College of Marin. Thank you to Book Passage for having us. And it's so exciting to be here. And I'm so excited to talk to you.
I want to start by saying something that I think I can speak for everybody here when I say this, but let me check though. Can I speak for everybody here with something I want to say? I promise it's good. You're thinking, yeah, you can say it, but what you're going to say? I can speak for all of us, right? I want to speak for all of us in saying congratulations on having 3 grown-up books out in the world.
Thank you.
That is no small thing.
Thank you.
To have your books all grown up and out in the world, how does it feel?
I love that description. I've never thought about it like that. They are grown up, aren't they? They
Yes.
left the house.
They left
yeah.
the house. They
I
left the
raised them.
house.
Yeah. How does it feel? You know, I feel proud because it took me so long to get my first book published. So, and I'll speak a little bit about that. I worked as a lawyer, and well, first of all, I'd always wanted to be a writer, and I majored in creative writing in college. I even was talking about it in high school, and actually like wrote a book my senior year of high school for this independent study project. They let us do that instead of taking like a science class or something. And so I'd always wanted to be a writer, and then I got to college and I still wanted to be a writer, but I think as I got closer and closer to senior year, I started to get nervous about, money and stuff like that. And so I decided to go to law school. But before I went to law school, I went to the Dominican Republic for a year. And I was working at this nonprofit organization, but I was also writing my first book, not the one that was published, a first book that still to this day has not been published. And I hated the experience. It was so solitary. And I didn't realize at the time that a lot of that was because I had just graduated college and it was just a transitional period. But I associated it with writing. And I was like, well, I don't think that's for me. So I went to law school. I didn't write for about 5 years. I left, I graduated, and then I worked at a firm. And my firm this is the middle of the legal recession at this time. And my firm, instead of laying people off, they came up with this program called Dewey Pursuits. Their name is Dewey. It was called Dewey and LaBeouf. And they came up with this program called Dewey Pursuits. And the idea is that they'll pay you a portion of your salary. It was really just severance. They just dressed it up and put a nice little bow around it. But they would pay you a portion of your salary. You would leave for a year and pursue your real dream. And then you would come back. And so that was on the table for a while. Like people had been taking that for years. And I thought about it, but I was like, no, I wanted to be a lawyer. I'm going to see this through. And then circumstantially, things changed with my boss, et cetera. I did decide to take that offer. I left. 6 months later, the firm went bankrupt. So there was nowhere to go back to. I could have gotten another legal job, but it was the middle of the recession. It was very difficult to find work. And so I was in this situation where I sort of had to write this book. It was what I said I wanted to do in terms of pursuing a dream. And so I started it, and I worked every day as if I were working at the law firm. I worked 8 hours at least on it a day. And I thought my idea was I'll do that for a year and then I'll get an agent. And of course, that did not happen in a year. It took about, I left the firm at the end of 2011. I got an agent in 2014. So it took 2.5 years to get an agent. And then I got this agent, and she had so many promises. She was like, oh, this book reminds me so much of this book I just published. You're going to get this, or this book that I just got acquired. You're going to get this 6-figure deal. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is amazing. She's like, all you have to do is a few edits. It'll just take a month or so. And then once you do those edits, we're moving, And so I did the edits. I took them back to her. She was like, oh, this is great. This is great. But wait, actually, you know what? Let's just do one more round of edits. This went on for like 1.5 years, no joke. And so I ended up having to leave that agent, which is so tricky. I don't know if you know, but like having an agent as an author is like striking gold, right? It's the first step that typically you have to take, not always, but typically you have to take. And so getting rid of that agent, I really was like, I felt like I was just floundering and back at square one, but I did it. And I thought, well, I went out on a limb and I trusted my gut and I left this agent. So now I'm going to be rewarded, I'm sure. And any minute I'll find another agent somehow. And, 9 months passed and that didn't happen. I was still querying, I was still writing, but like this book, I could not get it acquired. And so I ended up through my sister-in-law meeting an editor. She had worked for this editor and she said, I want to take you to brunch with this editor and his wife. So I went to brunch with the editor and his wife. And you won't believe this is actually a crazy story I didn't intend to tell, but I told you I was in the Dominican Republic. Okay. So I'm sitting at brunch with the editor and his wife, and the restaurant door opens and in walks my roommate from the Dominican Republic. And I hadn't seen this woman in 10 years at that point. If you had asked me where she lived, I would have said she might still live in the Dominican Republic. I have no idea. But she walked into this restaurant in Berkeley. And I thought, this has to mean something. I don't quite believe in coincidences. So I thought, this has to mean something. And I thought, surely they're going to offer me a deal at this brunch. And of course, that did not happen. So I left the brunch, but let me tell you what did happen. So a few days later, the editor's wife, who had been at the restaurant, she contacted me and she said, I'm doing this year-long narrative program. And the idea is, her name is Jane Vandenberg. And the idea is that you'd send her, 20 or 30 pages a month of your work, and she would sort of help you. She would edit it. She would be like a preliminary editor. And I thought, oh, well, no, I don't need that because I've already written my book. That book that has never been published. I was like, oh, I already wrote my book. That's my major book that's going to come out. And I thought about it for a few more days, and I thought, you know what, Margaret, you don't have an agent for that book. You don't have much going on with that book. So let's just see if you can write another one. And I had always had this idea in my mind about this family, about a book about a family, 3 generations of a New Orleans family. And it felt like it was almost too easy to write. I was like, oh, but that's such an easy story. Like I could do that really simply. It's no big deal. That's not going to be a big book. And I thought, well, I don't have anything else to do with this editor, so I'll just do that one. I wrote that one really quickly because, I kept saying it was easy. It was like I was just downloading it. All I had to do was type. That other book I had been working on for 10 years, and you could see my fingerprints all over it in terms of the effort. This book just like streamed through me. I was done in 6 months. I gave it to my editor's wife. She's like, oh, I like this. I think I'm going to show it to Jack. He was the editor, and he's the founder of Counterpoint Press. And he ended up wanting the book, but of course I didn't have an agent. So he was like, that's okay. He contacted 3 of his friends who were agents, and he was like, I want you to interview these 3 people and decide which one you want, which is such a total different experience from the one I had for 5 to 10 years. So this is such a long-winded response.
I love it. I love it.
But that's why I'm so proud, because I worked so much for it. And that's the thing with publishing. And I know you know this. I don't know anybody who hasn't worked like that to be published. It's such a tricky business. It's not like, I used to say all the time, it's not like the law where, you go to law school and you graduate, everybody knows the trajectory. This is something you can't predict when it's going to happen. And so I do. I feel proud.
And well, you should feel proud.
Thank you.
I can't remember who said it. I read it somewhere recently. They said that your books are like, they form their own little family. They're out of the house now. They're out in the world, but they form their own little family out there, and they take care of each other.
Oh, I love that.
Don't you love that idea?
I do. I had never thought about that.
Your trilogy's out there taking care of each other, so you don't have to worry about it.
That's right. That's right.
They're taking care of each other. And I love this quote from Chloe in the book. I think it was when I'm not sure what she was going through at the time, but it was a description of, she was performing and she was waiting for the applause. And that's what performers like usually. But because it's announced, she didn't like it particularly because it was an announcement that she wasn't in control anymore. And I thought, wow, that's what it feels like when you let the babies go out of the house. You've spent all this time with them, and now you let them go. It's like, really? I got to let them go? But you got to let them go. And that what she said was what you had her say, was that she had surrendered the miracle to the beholders. And I love that.
Thank you.
I just love that. It's what we do with our books. We surrender the miracle to the beholders, and the beholders may accept it and they may not, but that's the chance we take.
That's right.
And what a beautiful thing it is when they do accept it.
Yes, it makes it nicer when they do.
Yeah, it's much nicer. And one more thing from the book that resonates with this question is Mr. Franklin, the manager. He says, you get to the point where you got to release your children to the world if you want them to be worldly.
Oh,
You got to release them to the world if you want them to be worldly. And do we want our babies to be worldly?
Yes.
Oh, yes. we
yes,
do. Yes.
that's right.
So what has been your experience watching your art, your babies become a commodity?
That's such a great question.
Thank you.
You know, my editor, Jane Vandenberg, she's my first editor. She wasn't my technical editor. She told me she had all this faith in me. And, at the time I was like, maybe this will happen. I don't know. But she was like, no, one day you'll be an author. You're a writer now. One day you'll be an author. And she kept saying there's a difference between a writer and an author. And you may find that you don't like being an author. You may find you just like being a writer. I think I like both. I mean, I do. I like both. I prefer being a writer. Again, it's funny. I don't remember writing that line about Chloe. It was years ago, but it's true. It's a control thing. Like it's funny because when I'm writing, I actually am like so excited for it to be a book and so excited for it to get out there. But the comical thing is that I think I'm enjoying it more when I'm actually writing it because you don't know what people are going to say. And I think with the first book, it was a little bit easier in a way, ironically, because I didn't know anything about the industry. So I didn't know, like, they would, my publicist would be like, oh, you got a starred review in Kirkus. I'd be like, well, what's Kirkus? I literally didn't know. So I didn't know what to expect. Like, by the way, the first book didn't get a starred review in Kirkus anyway. That was made up. I just made that up. But the second one did. But, I think it was easier because I just was so happy to just have a book out there. I didn't care what the reception was. I just thought it'll be really cool if you can just buy it on Amazon. That's fine. And, or wherever. But then I think it gets trickier as you go on because now, I know a lot about it now. I know which awards are out there. I know about reviews. I know the industry a lot better. And so it's easier to identify what you didn't get. And I do think writers are naturally kind of neurotic people. And like, I don't want to speak for you. I'll speak for myself. Very introspective. I think, you have to be you have to have a tendency to ruminate, if you're a writer. And so I think it is easy to get caught up in that world. And that's something I'm always trying to resist for myself. I'm just trying to focus on the art. I'm really just trying to focus on my craft and making sure I'm doing it the best I can. But it's tricky when you're an author because, reception, it would be impossible for me. I think there are some authors for whom it's not impossible, but it would be impossible for me not to care a little bit what the readers think. I want them to like it.
Of course.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean. So how did you get the idea for On the Rooftop?
Okay. So I like to talk about this. So my mom and I, when I was a child, we grew up. First of all, she wouldn't let me watch any movies that were R-rated. Well, that's not true. She let me watch R-rated movies as long as they didn't have sex in them. I think her idea was if I don't show her movies about sex, she won't even know it exists. And so she was like, there were a few movies, they were all like very eclectic. They didn't have anything to do with one another, but there were a few movies. Fiddler on the Roof was one of them that was like, it was constantly playing in my home. Truly, like I know all the songs, I know all the dialogue, and it was just constantly playing. And my mom and I were both obsessed with it. I learned later that my mom watched the movie when it came out in the 70s, I think, when she was a child. So, and we've seen the play a couple of times, but it was really the movie that was really constantly running. And so she called me one day I don't remember when, but I know it was after 2005 because Katrina had happened. Hurricane Katrina had happened. And she called me and she said, I got a great idea for a book for you. Now, my mom calls me probably once every 2 weeks with a great idea for a book. And sometimes they're great and sometimes sometimes they're not great. So this, I'm just half listening to this. And she's like, you've got to write an adaptation of Fiddler on the Roof. And she's like, but you got to tell it from a Black woman's perspective. And my mom was really literal about it. Like she wanted it to really be exactly the same, like, 5 daughters trying to get married. She wanted it to be very literally the same. And instead of the father, though, she wanted it to be a mother. But otherwise, everything was pretty similar. And her idea was that the climactic scene of displacement would involve Hurricane Katrina. Of course, that would be the thing getting the people out of the neighborhood. And then the climactic scene would be the daughters and the mother holding signs saying, help me on the tops of their own roofs. The scenes that we were flooded with, during the storm. So I thought that was a brilliant idea. I actually was like listening by the end of it. And I was like, wow, I've got it. Yeah, I like that. The thing was, though, I had written about Hurricane Katrina. I wrote about Hurricane Katrina quite a bit in A Kind of Freedom. I also covered it a little bit in The Revisioners, but I was kind of over it. Sometimes, I don't know if that happens to you, you get over certain material. And also, we've had other writers, Sarah Broom, Jesmyn Ward, who have touched on Katrina. I think The Yellow House, Sarah Broom's The Yellow House had just come out when I was thinking about writing this book. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to, that was covered. I don't want to do that again. She did such a great job with it. And so I thought so there was that piece. And then also I wanted this book I wanted the tone to be a little bit lighter. And a little bit more joyful than a book about Hurricane Katrina would have been. And also than my other 2 books had been. My other 2 books were a little bit more sober. And so I thought, well, there has to be some other example of displacement in the country, displacement of Black people in this country, because I needed the parallel displacement with Fiddler on the Roof. As you may know, the characters live in this community called Anatevka, and are forced to leave Anatevka by the Tsar and it's a tragedy. However, it's a tragedy, and yet Fiddler on the Roof is such a lively play. So I was trying to figure out how to work that balance. And so I started researching instances of displacement targeting Blacks, and I came across the Fillmore district. I knew about the Fillmore district, of course. I live in Oakland, and I used to live in San Francisco, but I didn't know its history. I didn't know that it had been dubbed the Harlem of the West, that it had been, that it was infused with music at this time in the 50s and the 60s. I knew about the Great Migration. I knew that many Blacks from the South and elsewhere had gone to California at that time. For the war, and then stayed, and I knew about their optimism, but I didn't realize that the urban renewal program came about in the late 50s and in the 60s and just wiped that community out of there. I had no idea. So I thought, wow, this is actually an interesting parallel. I'll be able to have them displaced. I'll be able to incorporate the music of Fiddler because it takes place during the jazz era in the 50s and 60s in San Francisco. And it also was a great way for me to honor, this is the first time I wrote a book that's not set in New Orleans. I'm from New Orleans. And I thought, I was a little bit hesitant to write a book set in San Francisco, but I thought, you know what, this will be a great way for me to do it because the main character in On the Rooftop is not from San Francisco. She came through the Great Migration as well from Louisiana. I'm from Louisiana. So it's almost like we have the same lens. I've been living in the Bay Area for about 20 years, and so had she. So it felt more authentic for me to tell that story through that lens. So it's kind of came together. I don't know if you feel like this, but I get a feeling sometimes like when I know that I have the subject matter that I want, I get this feeling. I just know it. It just is very profoundly resonant. And I just knew that was it. I knew that was it. And I just kept going.
Beautifully. You kept going in a beautiful way. And as I read it, and I both read it in my book club. And then several months ago, yeah, we read it in our well-read Black Girl Book Club.
I didn't realize that.
But that was months ago. So I'd already read it. And we discussed it. And then to get ready for this, I listened to it.
Okay.
And the narrator, by the way, what's her name?
I don't,
Miles. Her last name is
Robin Miles.
Robin Miles.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
I love Robin Miles.
She does a
Yeah,
beautiful job.
she
Like,
does.
changes the voices and
She's very talented.
she's beyond talented.
Yeah.
It's really good. But
Yeah.
I kept wanting the soundtrack. I just,
Oh,
all the music, so much
yeah.
music
A
in
lot
the
of people
book.
have said that. I can send you the soundtrack.
Okay.
Mhm.
There's so much music in it and all the lyrics, the things, the songs that Chloe writes. And I just found myself, whenever we were approaching them singing and you wrote the lyrics, I thought, oh, I gotta get that. I wanna get that. I want that on my Spotify.
Yeah. And I have a Spotify playlist.
I
that'll
bet
fit.
you do.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to watch how beautifully you put on the page your keen observations of the human condition in this situation. And I know this book will resonate with a lot of people in the area in San Francisco because they either knew someone or they themselves lived through and are still living through the repercussions of the Fillmore going
Mhm.
through that.
That's right.
And it's so wonderful to see one more undertold or untold story being elevated. That's what I'm doing in my book in a very large way. So
That's right.
I just love that.
Thank you. That was another reason that I felt comfortable with the topic because I hadn't heard of it. I assumed a lot of people hadn't heard of it. I mean, I think a lot of people from the Bay Area have, but in the country, I think it is undertold.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. So what did you strive to do differently in On the Rooftop that is different from the other two?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I wrote On the Rooftop during the pandemic. I think I started in April 2020. Yeah, because the revisioners had come out in November 2019. I don't like to take, but I have to take like a 6-month break. And so I started in April. And actually, this is a side note. You know what I do? I have this habit. I always will start a book right after my other book comes out. It's not right after it comes out. It's actually like right now. You don't really have much to do with the peach seed. It's pretty much done, right?
Thank goodness.
Yes. Okay. So this is the time right? So this is the time I like to use to like write another book. I'll get these amazing ideas for another book. This has happened 3 times and I'll write it. It's usually a short story collection and I'll give it to my agent and he never thinks it's good enough to go to a publisher. This has happened 3 times. So it's like, I've learned to think of it as a way that I clean my palette. I cleanse my palette. It's like a little project that I do. And then I get to the real book a few months later. So anyway, I had started On the Rooftop during the pandemic and for everyone, I think it was a very dim time, a grim time, right? And although I was relatively privileged, I did have 3 children at home. One of them is in the back. 3 children at home who I needed to teach through distance learning, and it was a nightmare. I mean, not you, Nina. It was the other 2. But so I thought, I have 2 hours a day where I get this retreat, and I'm able to write. And I wasn't drawn to anything too serious, although this is serious. It's a serious topic. Don't get me wrong, but I think the presence of the musicality of it and the liveliness of the dream and the hope and optimism there, it kind of lightens the material, so it doesn't feel like you're in this depressing book, to me at least. And another thing that I tried to do was I tried to focus on the community in its height. So, and I hadn't done that before. I think before in my other 2 books, I kind of had the oppression front and center. And in this book, I wanted to focus on them when they were happiest, when they were most joyful and optimistic. And we all know what's coming, right? You can kind of feel it through the tension and the foreboding, but it's on the periphery and it's not taking center stage, because I just wanted to honor that community. I just thought how nice it would be to be a part of that. Like, you don't have to, you don't even have to knock on people's doors. You just walk right in and everybody knows everybody, and you share food with your neighbors, that kind of rich community. I just wanted to honor that. And so with this book, I sort of focused on the more positive, because I thought, I have a few hours a day. I'm already depressed with this pandemic. I'm just gonna create something that makes me happy during this time. And I really did have the goal. It was conscious at the time. I had this goal of like transferring the energy I was feeling when I was writing it, which was very high level, joyful. I wanted to like transfer that feeling to the readers. I really had that conscious goal of just like, of just sharing the energy in that way. And so that was different. I hadn't done that before.
Yeah, you can see that. So are you a singer?
No. Well, I mean, in the
Really?
car I sing.
In the
Yeah.
car?
Mhm.
Because you really capture what it's like to be up on the stage at the mic and singing and pushing your
Oh,
voice out. I thought,
Thank you.
she's got to be a singer to really
That's so nice of you.
write so beautifully into that experience.
Thank you. I did a lot of research
Okay.
with the music part. People like to talk about the research for the urban displacement, the urban renewal program, and that's true. That took a little bit of research too, but there wasn't as much there. I mean, it was pretty easy to encapsulate that in the book. With the music, I am not a singer. I'm not a dancer. I'm not a dancer. So even like I would say I put myself in my 20th percentile of dancers in terms of ability. And so even just figuring out how to say what the movements were in a different way, like, that was difficult for me. Like I can't keep saying that they're dancing. I have to figure out how to describe that in each time a different way. That was very difficult because
Yes.
I don't have that personal experience of that kind of movement in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And you touch on something that is front and center in the process of writing. How many ways can you describe walking? He walked into the room. Well, that tells me nothing.
Yeah.
He sauntered into the room. He glided into all these different ways. So I'm sure you had to really just
It was a lot of,
creative.
yes. And it was a lot of like watching YouTube videos and like old videos that were on YouTube of people dancing at that time and just trying to figure out like at a very basic level what they
Mhm.
were doing. And I took this class in college. It was called Ed 20. And they wanted to change the way you thought about things. So they made you write papers. Like you couldn't say I sat in the chair. You would have to say I sat in I don't even know if it would say thing. I can't remember how we did it, but it would be like you describe it at its most basic level, like the square back and the wheels at the bottom. And the person would have to deduce that you were talking about a chair. That's kind of how I handled the
Yes.
dancing thing. It was just like I had to get it to the most basic elements of
Break it down.
Yeah.
Yes, distill it down to
Yeah.
to the moves.
Yes.
See,
right. That's
you
right.
did that really
Oh,
well.
well, thank you.
Really
I
well.
tried.
I'm not a singer either, so
Okay.
I was I can dance a little bit.
You can
though.
dance.
But,
Yeah. You're like in the 90th percentile of dance. It sounds like,
Maybe.
yeah.
I'm not a dancer, but I like to dance. Did you have other titles for On the Rooftop?
Oh, that's
Was
such a good
always-
question. Well, it was based on Fiddler on the Roof. And I thought, hilariously, I thought this is so similar to Fiddler on the Roof. People are going to know from the first or second page that it's based on Fiddler on the Roof. And like people have read the book and not known. Many, many, many people, most people have read the book and not known. And I realize that everyone is not obsessed with Fiddler on the Roof. So they haven't seen it a million times. They're not looking for it. But so because I was basing it on Fiddler on the Roof, this was my mom's idea, actually. She thought I should call it The Roof. And I thought that was a great title too, but my editors were like, it's just too generic in terms of search terms. It was just a marketing decision.
Right.
And that's a good point. And so they gave me like a list of maybe 10 titles. One of them was Up on the Rooftop. I went over the titles with my kids and we kind of all decided that this was the title. And I still like The Roof though. But
The Roof.
this works better for all things considered.
But aren't you glad that it doesn't depend on Fiddler on the Roof to be enjoyed? and
Yes, I am.
appreciated?
You're right. I am
think
grateful
that's
for
a
that.
good
That's a
thing.
good point. That's a really good point. You're right.
So we were supposed to have you read at the top. I just
Oh,
realized
that's
that.
okay. It doesn't matter to me at all.
So
I
will
can
you
do it
read
now. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do that.
Okay, so I like to read from this section where Vivian, the matriarch, is meeting with the manager for the first time, and the manager is offering her daughters the deal, and she has to decide if she wants to take it. It's everything she's been praying for, but all of a sudden, when it's presented to her, she can see the upside and the downsides. Okay. She took another sip and studied the room once more. The alcohol had cleared her in a sense, and she could see now that even here at Champagne Supper Club, one of the big three in the city, the stage was dusty. The chorus girls' wigs were slanted, their recent baby pooches hanging over their panties. The Johns were losing their patience with the night ladies who took their time. Last week, Vivian had written final act at Champagne down on a sheet of paper and taped it to the icebox as their next big dream. But now, in the last hour, she had begun to want more for her daughters, a hell of a lot more. And if sending them off was the path there, she would have to let them go. Maybe it was the only opportunity they'd get. She looked up. Yes. What's that? Mr. Franklin asked. Yes, she repeated, feeling like she was coming to. Is that so? She nodded. You got it. It's a deal. She stuck out her hand and she was glad she had taken the time to polish her nails that evening, cherry red just like her lips, and he squeezed it tight. He was the type of man who seemed to always get his way, but he appeared surprised now, pleased but surprised. You serious, aren't you? He asked, standing. No doubt the other people in the club thought they were forming more than a business alignment. Standing too, she could feel how much she'd had to drink. She had to hold on to the edge of the table before she joined him in an embrace. When she pulled back, he signaled again to the waitress, this time for a round for everybody in the place. I'm managing her daughters, he yelled out to all of them, and the chorus girls were still shaking their behinds. They'd taken off their gowns, kicked them flat on the front of the stage, and they leaned toward the audience and shimmied their chests, their overflowing coconut bras jiggling. He's managing my daughters, Vivian called out to whoever hadn't heard, and the chorus girls cheered on their way off stage, arm in arm now, snapping their legs up to the ceiling in unison. In the audience, a group formed around Vivian. The news had brought everyone to life, the bored wives, the impatient Johns, the ladies of the night who had shielded themselves, all right, shielded themselves 5 drinks deep. By now, these ladies would have celebrated a murder, but luckily it was goodness tonight that called their names. Even the whites stood and clinked their glasses. The band joined on stage and played a tisket a tasket, and Mr. Franklin took her hand and they came together and circled while she kicked her legs in short, quick jerks. And then he extended his arm to swing her out and watched her switch her hips on her own. And then he brought her in again, only to lift her and spin her on his back while the crowd cheered. A lady usher at the church who cooked for Lena's barbecue restaurant accepted the hand of Deacon Washington, and they came together so tight there was no room for Jesus. But everyone was too mirthful to care, and the likelihood was it wouldn't get carried back to Shiloh the next day. And then a John took a lady of the night, and then a man took his own wife, and then a different man took a different man's wife. And the whites didn't know the moves, but they switched their hips to a distinct pulse of their own. And the chorus girls who had been on stage earlier jumped back on and sang. And then the trumpeter switched the tempo, and they weren't playing anything any of them knew. Now it was the saxophonist meeting eyes with the pianist and the drummer nodding back at the clarinet, and it was Vivian too, and not just her, but all of them, the collective soul of the place. The news Vivian had shared, the John's hopes, the wives' fears, all melding into one frequency. It was driving the sound, which was also in their bones. And without realizing it, they were all kicking their feet out at the same rhythm, snapping their bodies into their partners and back out again onto the floor, swerving and hopping and floating, really. And the joy of having formed something streamed through Vivian, lit her up, made her feel like she was shining. And she had had that feeling before when she was married, quick and simple as it was. And when she'd born each of the girls, of course, she had slipped above the ordinary world for a moment. And then the most recent time, she was at Jack's in the front row, watching her baby sweep a room up into their command. And she'd gone silent for some time, staring in awe. And here it was again now. She could sell this moment, she knew. People would pay everything for it. She would herself if she could learn to carry it beyond these walls. But for now, it was free, even to the whites who ventured down to the Fillmore for the barbecue and the blues, and who today, for the first time, had lingered. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Q&A. So, thank you so much, Margaret.
Thank you
I
so
love
much.
that message.
Thank you, and I love this conversation.
We could talk a long time, couldn't we?
Yeah, we sure could.
But we
Well,
want
we
to ask.
talked an hour the other day. I was,
Yes, you did.
yeah.
That's fun. But we want to have a Q&A at this point. If you have questions.
No, but I know
What's that?
Tayari Jones uses a typewriter.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and well, so I don't typically. I usually type, but I'm trying something new for this next book I'm working on. And I actually have started writing it longhand. I'm just trying something new because you know why? Oh, AJ Verdell in her book about Toni Morrison.
Yes.
Okay, did
Miss
you?
Chloe.
She's Miss Chloe. She said, because she used to teach at Princeton with Toni Morrison, and she said one day Toni Morrison asked her, one day Toni Morrison told her, I can tell the difference between the students who type and the students who write by hand. And AJ Verdell said, how can you tell? And Toni Morrison said, the ones who write are better. The ones who write it longhand are better. And then, you know who else writes longhand? Lauren Groff. And I very much admire Lauren Groff as a writer. I think she's a really phenomenal writer. I think she enters almost a sacred place when she's writing, that I can feel that she has accessed something outside of this world when I'm reading her work. And obviously the same with Toni Morrison. And so I thought, you know what, there's maybe something to that. And I remember, in high school, we always wrote it longhand. And I remember sometimes when I would hit on something, that I couldn't have necessarily accessed on my own, it was because I'm not going to say it was because, but I was also writing it longhand. So it's something I'm thinking about so far with this next book, I've only written longhand. It's a commitment though. Oh my goodness. It's
You have to hope you can read your writing.
right,
and
that
stuff.
part.
Other questions?
Yes. Okay.
Oh.
People on Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
So when you start writing, do you write with an outline? Do you write organically? How do you organize it? And has your training as an attorney helped you learn how to plan your writing?
That's such a good question. I think it has. I think I especially with the first two books, not as much with this one, but with the first two books, I didn't even want to start thinking about the outline or the book itself until I had figured out what it was I was trying to say, almost like a thesis. And that to me is reflective of the law school, the way we used to write legal memos. That's where I got that from, starting out with your main point and then backing it up with facts. And we had this whole way of writing called Iraq, where it was you would do the issue, you would write the issue, and then you would write the rule or the law that it was based on, and then you would apply the law to the facts in that situation, and then you'd have a conclusion. I almost feel like I write like that. I feel like I know what I want to say, and I use each scene. Each scene is like the way I'm applying what I want to say to the work, to the facts, if that makes sense. And they're all supposed to be there to support my thesis. And so, yeah, I didn't do it as much with this book, but the first two, certainly. I do always use outlines. And this time, I wrote a very intense outline for this fourth book, which I just started writing a few days ago. But I did something that I don't normally do. I usually just do a little bit of research. I know what I'm going to write about. I do a little bit of research on it, and then I write, and then I go back to my research and do extensive research, and then fill in the gaps of where I know I have. It's easier that way because you have specific gaps. You're oh, I need to know how to run a farm in 1920. So I'm just going to look at that, as opposed to looking up everything that was going on in 1920. So for this book, I actually want to know everything that's going on in 1920. I'm taking I'm trying to do more and more with each book, in terms of craft. I just want to keep pushing myself. So it took me 6 months to do the research for the book I'm writing now. I did most of it. I'm sure I'll have more to do, but in my mind, I did most of it. And it actually has helped a lot with the outline. I'm able to get a really detailed outline going, because I'll read about things that happen. And it's not that I'm using what happened, so to speak. It's more that when I read about something that happened in the past, it kind of it sparks all of these other ideas. And I've heard other historical fiction writers say the same thing. It's interesting. It sparks all of these other ideas about things that could have happened. It's these possibilities. And so it gives me so much more information for my outline. So I have a really detailed outline now. Yeah, which I think I like this format better. I think I'm going to keep doing it this way. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on Zoom? We have a lot of folks on Zoom, and if they have any questions, not so far. Okay, well, if you're on Zoom and you're listening, put a question in the chat box. How about someone here? Yeah.
I was wondering, kind of a little bit more personally, do any of your children express themselves the way you do through the writing? And then how is, like, are they scared to like show you their work? I'm asking because my daughter is 12 now, but she's a really, like, since she was little, since started writing, she's a really good writer. And I always, I'm like, that's so good. I'm like, you wrote that?
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, she's not really into it, but she's good when she has to do it. So like, how do you encourage that, like that continued expression?
That's such a good question. Okay, so it's like tricky. No, so my youngest son is 6. He's not writing anything. We're teaching him how to read right now. So I have twins who are 9. And yeah, I think my daughter, you love to write, right? I think she writes creatively, I would say. She writes creatively. And my son, her twin is would you say he's extremely creative in terms of, yeah, I mean, he's extremely creative, and he sort of thinks in that way, you know, you can kind of tell. And so what I try to do with both of them is just like, I definitely edit their work for school. Like if it's homework, yes, I'm going to correct, but I don't correct when it's creative. I don't do anything. I just kind of stay out of it, like, except for encouraging. It's only positive. I'm just like, that's amazing, you know. And as a mom, as a writer, you know, as a person, of course, I'm like, oh, I maybe would have done it that way, or I maybe would have done it that way. But it doesn't matter. It's not about me, because I just want to keep that place really sacred for them and really, you know, clean for them. I want them to just have total positive relationships with their art. And I think my parents did that for me too. I don't think I'm like, you know, breaking the mold or whatever the expression is. My parents were pretty good about that. Like they never critiqued my personal writing, my creative writing.
Harvey says there is a question from Zoom. Would you like to read it, Harvey?
Sure. Can you tell us more about the, Fillmore displacement?
Yeah. So there were 2 phases of the urban renewal program, and A1 started in the late 50s, and then A2 came about in, well, actually, I'm sorry, A1 was 53. And A2 was the late 50s and the early 60s. And in total, they displaced about 13,000 Black people from the Fillmore district, and people who owned their own homes were compensated by law, but not fairly, because they were able to distort it so that it wasn't really at market value. And then the majority of people didn't own the homes. So they were just made to leave, and that was it. And you know, many of them went to surrounding areas, and there has never been an effort to get them back that has been successful. So we still have these huge gaps in the Fillmore district, and really all over San Francisco. We have voids where Black communities were and where they are no longer. And this was going on all over the country. It was not just San Francisco. In other areas of the Bay Area, it was going on as well, in Oakland and in Richmond specifically. And the interesting thing is that it's still going on, right? Okay, so that's another reason I like working with historical fiction. I think it's interesting to take note of what has changed. We have had so many positive changes. Of course, nobody can argue with that. We've had so many advancements, and then in some ways, not much has changed. And when you place the fact patterns next to each other, even though they're generations apart and they look similar, it's really scary. But I think it's good for people to see that, because I think there can be a lot of false ideas about how much progress has been made. There's a way to honor the progress and still acknowledge the fact that we have way more to do.
Absolutely.
Yes, please do. That's right.
And the original people.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Oh, gosh. Yes. And there's a line in this book. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it, but it's something like Vivian had a Japanese neighbor and
Oh,
they used to
yes.
share
I remember.
food.
Yes. I
And
remember
there's a comment, and I meant this in there as a form of foreshadowing and also as a way to acknowledge that it's the same systems of displacement affecting people of color. It's not just Black people, it's a system. And there's a line in here where she's like, I don't like to think about that, but one day she was there and then the next day she was gone. And I don't like to think about that. And anyway, nothing like that would ever happen again. Yes. That's right. That's right. It's exactly right.
Oh, so
Okay.
the comment was that the title was particularly relevant because there was layer upon layer of injustice with both the Fillmore district, the Japanese Americans and the African Americans, and in Fiddler and the Roof. Some other question? Oh, here's another one from Zoom.
Good.
All right. If you would love, I would love to hear a little bit more about your experience in the Dominican Republic and how you think it helped, if at all, get you to where you are now.
That's a good question. It was, man, I did not enjoy that time for various reasons, but I did write a first draft of a book. And of course it hasn't been published, but what I've learned is nothing is wasted because, I said with my first book that actually did come out, A Kind of Freedom, it actually was published. And I told you I wrote it in 6 months. That's because I had worked for 10 years on a book before. I was accumulating my skills. Like I wouldn't have been able to write that book in 6 months if I hadn't been, working so hard on the first one, and it seemed like it was fruitless at the time. It seemed like nothing is coming of this, but it actually just transferred. The skills, of course, transfer. So now I haven't been able to write another book in 6 months. Seems like maybe a one and done thing. but I learned quite a bit. And the thing is, I was self-taught. And we were talking about this on the phone. I don't have an MFA. I teach an MFA program, but I don't have an MFA. And so I had to teach myself. I was just reading books. I was just reading fiction and teaching myself how to do the same thing people I admired were doing. And that was all that 10-year period, in the DR and elsewhere. That was all of that, and I think it was all cumulative and accretive.
I have a question for both of you. Can you talk about your writing routine? Are you early risers? Do you write late at night? Do you have a special place in your home where you write?
I write all the time. I have to make myself not write pretty much. You can ask my husband, he'll verify that. But I find the early morning is really nice. I mean, really early in the morning, like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, because the barking dog hasn't gotten up yet. That's one good thing. And my inner critic is still asleep.
Yeah, that's right.
At that hour. So
That's
I
right.
like that time. And
Okay.
just whenever it works. But I think it's a good thing to have life to go into, because otherwise I'd be up in that room too much.
That's true.
And that's not good for the work. It's good to step away, get a new perspective on it, and come back fresh. So.
And do you find that the material in the morning is better? Like when you look back on it, the material at 4 a.m. is better than the material later?
Sometimes it depends.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that as a rule.
Okay.
That's true.
Okay, that's good to know, because that's another thing I was going to try. I
Mm.
was going to try to just do it like 4 a.m., 5 a.m., because, that's another thing Toni Morrison did. and many people do. And I find like you said, the critic isn't there. It seems like things are like streaming out a little bit more easily at that time. But I love hearing that. I don't actually have a routine. Yeah, when I stop teaching in the summer, I'm going to just be able to do it, maybe like 4 or 5 hours a day. And I'll just do it whenever I've gotten my kids where they need to go. But yeah, there's no routine. And it's funny, I can do it anywhere. Like right now, I have a son who goes to this outdoor school, and it's only 4 hours a day. And it's in El Cerrito. I live in Oakland. So it takes me about 30 minutes to get there. I would lose too much time if I tried to go back and forth. It's only 4 hours. So I sit in my car and I write, and it's fine. Doesn't, no problem. Yeah.
Yep, you can write anywhere.
You can write anywhere. Yeah. That's
No
what I've noticed.
excuses, writers.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. Can we have another? Oh, yes, please.
I have
Ms.
one
Jones.
last question.
Yes,
for you,
please.
if I may.
Of course.
So now that your 3 novels are all grown up and out in the world taking care of each other, if current you could go back to debut you, what would that conversation be like? Would you have some advice for that person, or would that person have some advice for you?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that person would have advice for me because, and I touched on this earlier, but being a debut writer is so nice because you don't have any expectations. It's like whatever you get is great. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. And so I sort of wish that I could be more like that. I'm trying, I'm working on it. So I think there's hope for me. But the fourth book, I just want to be like, I like that. And that was enough for me. I did everything I could have done with that book. I couldn't have done a thing more. And that's enough.
That's enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are so lucky to have Book Passage here in the back. If you'd like to buy a copy of Ms. Sexton's book, you can see Kay, and also you can order the Peach Seed, Ms. Jones' book. And there are 5 lucky winners who've won a free copy of On the Rooftop. And if you stand up and fold your chair up, you'll see it says lucky winner. It's taped to the bottom of your chair.
Way. Oh my God, I love that. That's brilliant.
It might be in a chair near you. Oh, there's one. There's one.
Nice.
There, you got one
That's really
too.
cool.
Yeah, well, it was a group effort. Wonderful. One more round of applause for our authors. Oh. Give those